All right. Well, I think we're about ready to get started. Are you good, Dr. Tunnell?
I'm good.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dawn Whidden. I've been with Education Advanced going into 3 years now. It's been a really great experience being able to offer efficient tools so that educators can benefit and students really can reap the benefits of that as well. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share an agenda with you all, and then we'll allow Dr. Kim Tunnell to share some of her experiences and introductions. So again, today our focus will be on transparency matters, building trust and accountability. Our agenda here, we will get started with the introduction of Dr. Kim Tunnell. Also, our guiding question today is how can school and district leaders improve organizational transparency to increase clarity, trust, and accountability? And again, as a reminder, we do have that live Q&A open and would love to hear from you all any questions that you have that would help us really dive into the topic a little bit further. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to let Dr. Kim Tunnell, who is our Vice President of Educational Operational Services here at Education Advanced, give herself a little introduction.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so nice to be able to visit with you today and share some thoughts about accountability, trust, and transparency. I retired after 35 years in public education, leading in both California and in Texas in a variety of roles after exiting the classroom as curriculum director, professional development, and then finishing my career as superintendent. So have a wide variety of experiences both in California and in Texas. So I'm very honored to be here and glad that you're here. And like I said before, please be willing to share your thoughts and resources as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Tunnell. So let's go ahead and dive into the initial guiding question today. And that has to do with how schools and district leaders improve organizational transparency to increase clarity, trust, and accountability. And the first question that brings us to is, what does transparency in education mean to you, Dr. Tunnell?
Well, I think it sure has evolved over the years. To me, transparency is the openness and dialogue amongst the organization. So with employees, leadership, and it's the ability that builds trust. And the reality is, when you have a strong transparency and clarity, you will have increased performance. Research has shown that performance increases because people are clear about what the expectations are. I think transparency has taken on a new meaning in recent years as the attacks on public education continue with what are we teaching our children and what is going on in the classroom and things like that. I think transparency has evolved into communication, more communication about where we are and what's happening. But in the sense of the organization itself, it's really building a strong team. And I think a big piece of that is sharing that vulnerability. You know, as a leader, I'm the first one to say, I don't know all the answers, but we can present the data and a problem that needs to be solved, and then collectively as a team work towards that solution. So, and from the employee standpoint, it increases engagement. There's more buy-in when there's transparency and the reality is communicated. For example, in a district when there is a reduction in revenue that comes in, showing, okay, this is what we're looking at, and soliciting the problem solving from the employees really builds that engagement, because they've become part of the solution instead of just waiting to hear from leadership what the next steps are going to be. So definitely a team building opportunity for an organization, the more transparent and the more you clearly communicate out.
Like during the first part of your answer, I kept thinking communication, and you said that so boldly. And so I think you're absolutely right. How necessary that just having those open lines of communication are. What are some ways, Dr. Tunnell, that you've been able to maybe avoid certain pitfalls by having open lines of communication? You know, what are some of the efforts you make to ensure that communication is clear?
Well, I think of an example of when I was an administrator in California. And of course, out there, there is a very strong teacher and administrator union presence. And so I remember being on the negotiating team on the teacher side, and then in later years on the administrative side. And we were dealing with some loss in funding. Prior administration hadn't communicated additional funding that had come in, so trust had been broken. So I think the display of data and the actual transparency of this is where we are. Same thing in trying to increase student achievement. When teachers are able to see the scores of the students and, you know, go through that data processing and brainstorming, it makes a huge difference in that, not only that transparency, but leading towards solution in, okay, how do we increase our student achievement with this one subpopulation of students? So it's, you know, that synergy that happens when all minds come together around a problem.
Love that. Definitely that team mentality.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So let's take a peek at our next question. Has to do with, again, that accountability, transparency. So what are some barriers school leaders face that prevent schools and districts from achieving transparency? So maybe what are some of those obstacles that kind of block that transparency for districts and schools?
So Don, I was thinking, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the barrier of FERPA. You know, you have to be careful about how you communicate out, especially when you're talking about students and scores, and whether it's discipline trends or achievement trends, you always have to be aware of FERPA laws. But I think one of the biggest barriers is just that tool that communicates out. So I've worked in lots of different areas where we've created our own dashboard, and it could be a spreadsheet. And I'll just say, just from past experience, make sure if you've created a dashboard that it's a view only. I remember at one point having it be editable, and so the data got changed, and it really jacked up our whole process of communicating out the data, because it, you know, ended up changing. So, but I do think that's one of the biggest struggles. I remember the multiple spreadsheets that we would have to try and track information. And so I think that's a little bit different than the tools that are available. And I know we're going to be talking about some of those tools, but I think just having that overall dashboard. Sean Covey, in his book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, one of those is creating a scoreboard, they call. And I think that's really important. Once goals have been established, problems been identified, and you have a plan in place, it's really important to create that scorecard or dashboard or whatever you want to use that tracks that ability. So if I'm working towards increasing math scores in grades 4 and 5, do I have a dashboard that's presented? And I know as superintendent, we had dashboards that we shared out with our school board members on a regular basis at school board meetings on, this is where our students are in performance. This is how they have progressed throughout the year. So anytime you can make data visible and have those goals clearly identified, what the expectations are, and how everybody can help with that, it makes a tremendous impact. out in when I was curriculum director, we were trying to increase literacy scores. And so we had all teams from our bus drivers asking about what books had been, the students have been reading, giving out awards and stickers to kids who are reading on the bus, to our cafeteria workers. It can be a whole district initiative. And once that's clearly communicated and that transparency is there, the scoreboard is in place, it really leads to a whole team effort in accomplishing those goals.
I love that. I like how even from the bus drivers all the way up, everybody can have their specific role or tracking mechanism to ensure everybody's kind of geared towards the same vision.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest pieces is the time that has to be invested. And that is a barrier. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. But if you're going to be truly transparent and provide clarity and have accountability, that takes time. It takes time in creating the message. It takes lots of time in communicating the message. And then it takes time in meeting with people in one-on-one or small groups or as an organization. So you have to allow for that time. And I think in many cases, leaders get so barraged with all the requirements and expectations that instead of taking the time to do that communication and provide that transparency, it's really easy to say, okay, this is the problem, here's the solution, and just share that out. And I think that that's a barrier to the whole transparency process.
I love it. It's almost like by design and not by default, right? Being intentional with the things that you want to achieve and having ways to measure that.
Absolutely.
That. All right, let's move on to our next question. What tools, and we kind of already touched on this a little bit, but what tools can help increase transparency in districts and on campuses?
I think there are a variety. I've kind of mentioned already, establishing some kind of scoreboard. It could just be, a bar graph, or it could be on a spreadsheet, or there's plenty of tools that are out there and available. I think it's really important to have a reporting mechanism. So if you've got software or resources, what kind of reports can you pull from that is going to give you the data to be transparent? It's really hard to be vulnerable. And I think that's can be a barrier to transparency, in that whole admitting, I don't have all the answers, and how can we solve this? But if you've got reports that demonstrate where the data is, if you have a mechanism to communicate that out, that makes a tremendous impact in it. The other thing is you have to have some type of tool to communicate. And I'm going to say that not everybody reads emails. I remember being a principal and sending out the bulletin for the week with all the dates in it. And I remember one of the teachers said, well, I didn't know about this. And I said, it's in your weekly bulletin that you get, every Friday for the following week. And she said, who reads those?
Only if it says like Free Gene Day, right?
Yeah. So I think a variety of methods, not just, writing or emails or newsletters, but also face-to-face conversations, your direct reports, setting up one-on-one, regular one-on-one meetings where you sit down with them and you hear what their struggles are, and you can be over communicating what the expectations are and being transparent in that. I think sometimes we feel like when we communicate, we've delivered the information, but communication and understanding really only happens on the part of the recipient. And so those one-on-one meetings really help to clarify and to make sure that people are on board. Same thing with the, with the scoreboards, Surveys can also be used. Surveys can be very powerful in providing feedback and helping to communicate and solicit ideas as well.
I love that you talked about tools that provide you with the source of data. And I reflect back on my years in administration or even in the classroom. And it's like when you can use that data to drive the discussion, because we get so protective over whether it's test scores or whether it's our master schedule or, you know what I mean? So we get so protected and we're so invested in that. So to be able to use the data to help drive those decisions so that we're having a common conversation without the emotional attachment. So
yes, I always say data is a flashlight. It's not a hammer. And so when you use data and as a flashlight into a situation, you remove some of that emotional, oh my gosh, these are my scores and they're going up against, scores in the other teacher and some of the comparisons and things like that. So again, going back to building trust and having that transparency there makes it easier when you get into that problem solving and really utilizing the data to drive your decision making.
Yes, ma'am. I've heard you mention trust now several times. What is the importance of trust in an organization, and how do you nurture that? What are ways that you've helped increase that so that your culture can also benefit?
I think I read a book by Joel Manby called Love Works, and it's a tremendous leadership book about how going in, being authentic, like Brene Brown says in Dare to Lead. We have to be ourselves and we have to be vulnerable and willing to admit. I'm the first one that will say, hey, I screwed up, or that was not the right decision at that point in time. So I think that vulnerability and building relationships, really that authentic working together, knowing that our mission in serving children is common and that we have those shared values, I think that really helps build that trust within an organization. Trust is one of those things, it's very hard to build, but it's very easily broken.
Sure.
And so being cognizant of the need to continually work on relationships, to be honest and open. And, I say a lot, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And in leadership, sometimes we do a whole lot more talking than we should. And so use those listening ears to see what the culture is, how to build trust, how to further engage employees makes a tremendous difference. And again, once that trust is there, you can move mountains and accomplish great things, and performance naturally rises with that strong trust that's there. So I think, going back to your question, Dawn, just being yourself, being open, not holding back on the information. Granted, not everything needs to be shared. And there's always the risk when you are transparent that you can be misunderstood, or if data can be misconstrued and start other things. But that's where knowing your group and your team and really working together can make an impact. So.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kim. All right. So now we'd like to open it up for any live Q&A. Feel free to drop that into our webinar here. We'd love to field some of the questions from our participants today.
And Dawn, while we're waiting on that, I just was going to mention, because I am a big proponent of leadership and building capacity, and always looking for books. So I mentioned Dare to Lead by Brene Brown, which is an excellent leadership book. The speed of trust, when you were talking about trust, Stephen Covey wrote a book that's phenomenal about how to build trust within an organization. I think I mentioned already Sean Covey's The Four Disciplines of Execution for educators. There's 4 disciplines of execution in the workplace, but there's one specifically for educators. And then the other one that I really like is Liz Wiseman. She wrote the multipliers, and then she wrote one for educators as well called the multiplier effect. And it's how we lead and our perception of leadership in building trust so that we can magnify the strengths in others and multiply performance. And so when you use that multiplier effect and you adopt some of those strategies and beliefs, then it's over 2 times the productivity within an organization. So those are just some
Always
there.
Always looking to add to my what's next to read list for sure.
Yeah.
Do have one question that we often get sometimes in regards to kind of having transparency with staffing and FTE allocations. What are your thoughts behind that? What's the importance there of really having data drive some of those decisions when it comes to ensuring that you're equitably staffed?
Yeah, so I remember the days of covering the whiteboard in the office so that if teachers were coming in and out, and some of it was strategic because they wanted to see where they were going to be teaching and, you know, what their schedule was going to look like. I think from the standpoint, and as a principal, I also know I was very good at hiding the number of staff that I needed.
Me too. Guilty.
Yeah, and inflating it. I mean, if that's the game, then
I always did it with the best intentions, right?
Right. I'm going to play to win, right? So I think, again, it goes back to building that trust and really looking at the overall picture. When you're transparent about, here's what we're spending in staffing, here's our needs. For example, if your math scores are low and you want to increase those, then you really should have a lower class size in math. Well, in order to do that, where can the staffing adjust? Because in most districts, about 85% of the budget is personnel and personnel expenses. So when, you know, the state rolls out a new budget and there's cuts or some other factors that happen that you're trying to, when I was superintendent, we were trying to create a CTE program. And so I knew that we had some additional staff at our high school, wasn't sure exactly where. And so the staffing component, we had, actually that was one of my first exposures outside of Test Town with Education Advanced. And it was before Cardonics scheduler was even built. They had the staffing component and they came in and we were able to, through attrition, we didn't have to do any RIFs. We were able to save 5 positions, which was over $250,000 and allowed us to start our CTE programming. And so I think that kind of transparency and utilizing staffing in the sense of trying to plan for student-centered scheduling is a little bit of a paradigm shift in some districts, but the reality is if you can work with your team, and sometimes teachers come up with great things, you know, instead of teaching 2 sections of this, I could teach 1 section this, and then I could pick up, you know, a dual credit or some other type. So I think that type of data has a tremendous impact on being student-centered, number 1, but also being fiscally responsible and providing the resources where they need to be.
Right. Love that. We did get a question, Dr. Tunnell. So the question is, have you found ways to build trust and transparency with the community, parents, and students? So I love that twist of the angle there.
Okay, so same thing applies. Working and meeting one-on-one or in small groups, being involved in the community, soliciting parent input. You know, on the, you know, most districts across the United States have to have campus oversight teams. They're called a variety of things, but engaging parents and bringing them to the table. And it's not just, I remember parents saying, this is just a rubber stamp. You want us to come in. And it's like, no, we want to solve problems. We want to show you the data and then let you help. And I think when that happens, I'm thinking of an example. When I was principal at a small school out in California, we were low performing, and we worked with community organizations to come in. We got parents engaged, did some parenting classes, but also solicited their ideas from home, what could help at home, what resources the school could help provide. And over the course of 3 years, they went from being a low performing Title I school to a blue ribbon school. And so I think when you can engage parents, when you can engage the community, and the one group we leave out a lot is students. When students are engaged and they're tracking their own performance and they're owning their learning, the power behind that success is tremendous. Great question. But yes, lots of reaching out, lots of communication.
Love it. Awesome. Well, we are about up on our time today. Just wanted to take a minute to review a suite of products that we offer that could be considered those operational tools. As Dr. Tunnell mentioned, we have a tool that works on curriculum called Embark. Cardonics does work with master schedules and staffing plans to put that data behind those decisions. TestTown is probably familiar to most. It is our oldest product that really organizes school assessment processes and operating procedures. One of our newest tools that we're very, very excited to share with districts is our Pathway Graduation Tracking. Really takes a peek at CCMR and auditing transcripts and looking at testing data. So all of it is housed in one location. And then we also have an evaluation tool that we have to offer with working with your staff. So again, Dr. Tunnell, thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure visiting with you and listening to your experiences and your answers. We appreciate that. Again, we also want to thank everybody who took the time out of their busy day for joining us. So thanks again, Dr. Tunnell. We appreciated it. And thank you all for sharing some of your time with us today. Have a great day.
Wonderful.